Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just wait for people to come in and we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Lovely to see some familiar faces on the participant list. Hi, Nazrin. Hi, Amber. Just a couple of other people I'm letting in the waiting room. Amber, I'm tempted to make you co-host and you can be my tech support if I need it. Brilliant. I think that's everyone in for the waiting room. I'll just give it another minute for those who haven't joined yet. Just if anyone's navigating, I don't know about you, but when I go through Eventbrite, I always forget my login details and have to go hunting for the link. So we'll just give them a moment. Fab. So let's make a start on our lunch and learn session today. So the subject we're covering today is experience as a first-time small charity CEO. And I thought I'd share a little bit about my journey of joining Power for the People, who I joined as their first employed CEO about 18 months ago, and sharing some of the tips and tricks that helped me, but also the lessons I learned along the way. Lessons that hopefully you can benefit from and not repeat my mistakes. And there'll be lots of opportunities, I hope, to ask questions, to share your experience, because I'm a sample size of precisely one, and there's so much variety in the sector, and everyone's experiences will have been different. So it'll be really helpful to get your comments and insight. Not to mention that I've still got a little bit of a sore throat from something that was about 3 weeks ago. So I'll run out of breath if I try and talk for the full 45 minutes. So definitely looking for this to be interactive and having input. So I've put some slides together. I'll just do a share screen so I can bring those up for you. And I'll just close the few windows I've got in the background still that should have been closed previously. My bad. So welcome along, everyone. Really great to be here and to be part of the first day of Small Charity Week, and just really fantastic to see what Vic and Wayne and the team have done to pull together. I think I saw a tweet that was over 100 events happening this week. A whole host of stuff. So just a slide to remind you of some of the other things that are coming up through the week. You can book up to, I think it's the evening before or the day before the events take place. So do check out the event. Yes, it does say that on the slide. The bookings are open until the day before each event. So I'd really encourage you to check out what's on offer. There's a brilliant lineup. And some really fantastic talks that I've signed up to as well, because I'm a firm believer that that learning never stops. So what we'll be covering over the next 40-ish minutes or so now, I think, is just sort of exploring a bit the role of the CEO in a small charity, and to give it a bit of structure for the session. I was thinking about it in reflection or in relation to Akivo's publication in the first 100 days of a CEO. They sort of break it into 3 distinct phases. So there's the sort of the anticipation phase, which is the period and the lead up to starting that role. The encounter phase, which is really that sort of first 100 days in post, and then the implementation phase, which is sort of beyond that first 100 days. So that's what we'll be structuring today's session around. And then, as I say, plenty of time. Please ask questions throughout. Just drop them into the chat. If I know that they're sort of coming up later, if it's better to hold it to the end, I might just do that, but I will try and get through all the questions by the end of the session. And if people do want to stay on, I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer, but I've sort of timed it to run for the 45 minutes as planned. So just a little bit about me. I've been in the charity sector. I always describe it as I fell into it by accident. I worked in the private sector in New Zealand for a management and training consultancy, doing a lot of work with government clients. And I came over here initially for what was 2 years of backpacking around Europe in 2007, I think it was. But soon realized that my Kiwi dollar wasn't going to get me very far. So needed to get a job. And a temping agency just happened to place me with what was then the East London Connections Partnership. So Connections was the service for young people 13 to 19, giving careers and personal advice. And I think it was the first time I'd ever been in an organization where I just saw people working with purpose, towards something that was creating impact in our world and making a difference. And that was me hooked, really. So I've been in the sector ever since, working in primarily small to medium organizations, I would say, whether those are local CVSs. I spent a decade working for the Foundation for Social Improvement. And as I say, joined PFP as their first time CEO, well, first employed CEO. So it was a first for both of us. I've also worn trustee hats in organisations large and small. I'm currently a trustee of the Small International Development Charities Network. I'm kept on my toes by my just recently joined the ranks of Three Nature. It was his birthday in March, who definitely keeps me on my toes. And when I'm not doing my part-time role for PFP, I also do freelance consulting work on strategy, impact, income and financial sustainability and governance. So that's a little bit about me. I'd love to know a little bit more about who we've got in the group today. So maybe if you drop in your name, your organization that you're here on behalf today, and where are you in your journey as a CEO of a small charity? Is it something that you're considering, that you're aspiring to do? Is it something that you're currently in and you're looking to build your peer support network and connect with other chief execs of small charities? Maybe you're incredibly experienced in the role and you're looking to just boost your and refresh your learning. But I'd love to just learn a little bit more about who we've got in the group. So if you just want to drop that into the chat and introduce yourself, that would be great. I'll just pop myself on mute and give you a couple of minutes for that. Live tweeting, Madeline, lovely. I better have some good sound bites and nuggets for you. Excuse me. Welcome, Frida. Good to have you here. Julia, thank you. Sarah, nice to see someone from the Lucidity Network as well. Thanks, Amber. Pat, it's good to have you here. Michelle and Lisa, welcome. Hi, Sammy, good to have you here. And Anna. I'm sure that there's more to it than somehow becoming CEO, Anna. But it's amazing how that imposter syndrome kicks in. And I reflect on that a little bit later. I'm sure we've all felt it. Jim, great to have you here. Making the switch into the charity sector as well. I hope it will hook you in the same way it did me. Hi, Jonathan. Brilliant. So we've got a real mixed group here, some that are newly in post, some that are thinking about making the move. I hope that sort of oh, thank you, Nazrin. Nazrin's our founding CEO at Power for the People. And actually, a little bit later when I talk about it, has been absolutely instrumental in the transition for me being a really positive experience. I've got a fan base here. Hi, Wayne. Thank you. Lovely to have you here too. Oh, so wonderful to have so many brilliant people on the call. A couple more people in the waiting room. So I will be kind of toggling between the two. That's life as a small charity chief exec, I guess, multitasking. I read something recently. I thought to me this image describes all the many different things you've got to be doing as a CEO of a small charity. You know, you're sort of managing all these chess pieces. You're responsible for you need to be able to have that helicopter view of what's going on, but you also need to be able to kind of magnify and drill down into the detail. You're thinking constantly about the money and the finances and looking at how you raise the profile of your organization. Reaching targets, making sure all those jigsaw puzzles fit together, pieces of the jigsaw fit together, and really safeguarding, making sure that you're safeguarding the charity's purpose and directing its activities, of course, working with and through your trustees to be clear on what that purpose is. But I read a really funny LinkedIn post, I think it was. I don't know if anyone else has seen it, from Penny at Getting on Board. And she talks about, that life as a CEO of a small organization is that you're switching constantly from sort of high level strategic stuff to the really mundanely operational. And I think it's so true. Today, if I think about my morning, it was getting some due diligence organized, completing a due diligence assessment for a potential funder, through to making an update on our Microsoft account and managing the back end, because you're sort of all things. You're the head of IT, you're the head of fundraising, you're the head of HR and volunteer management, and wearing lots of different hats. And particularly in a very small team. And I appreciate when we talk about small charities, there's a huge spectrum there. I mean, I am the only UK employee. We have a team managed by our partner organisation, sort of teams employed in Kenya and Uganda by the local organisations that we partner with. And I have volunteers who support our work and committees that are absolutely instrumental. But I am that sole employee. So you do end up spending your time doing a huge variety of things, which is wonderful and exciting, but also can be challenging at times. But I think some of the things I sort of learned about the role over the years, and a lot of this was through my time with the FSI and supporting trustees and chief execs of small charities, was just how critical that role is. You're really bridging the relationship between the trustees and the staff team, and managing those stakeholders, the external relationships, and supporting your trustees to do the same as well, and really leading through your staff and volunteer team to be able to deliver the organisation's ambitions and impact. And I think there's a critical relationship there that between the trustees and the chief exec. They really need them to build that staff and volunteer team, to give leadership, and work with the chair and trustees to ensure that trustees are able to give their best. And at the same time, from the chief exec side, they need that authority and the trust of the board to manage the day-to-day, being able to make decisions without being hamstrung, but also knowing that they can draw on the collective wisdom of the board to make decisions and deliver the strategy. So I do think it is quite a unique type of role that small charity chief execs play. And for those of you that are in post, I'm sure much of this will resonate with you as well. I mentioned previously, sort of in thinking about the role of the chief exec and taking those first steps, that these 3 stages from Akivo can be really, really helpful. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time exploring each one of these. So these sort of the pre-joining, the anticipatory stage, the time that you actually are in post, the encounter phase, and then the implementation and adjustment phase. So sort of post that first period. And to my mind, it doesn't really matter if you're already in post or you're about to start a new role. It can be reinvigorating to to take this approach and take a step back and assess, and I suppose constructively question where you're at. And I think particularly challenging for those who introduce themselves on the chat um, as potentially looking to make that shift within their existing organization. It's really helpful to think about it as a phased approach to help you manage, I suppose, set yourself up mentally and emotionally for those changes. I think it can be a little bit different if you're coming in fresh to an organization, because these stages are probably more naturally defined. So at that pre-joining sort of anticipation stage, I think the first tip I would have is really to do your research. So thinking about, there's a lot of self-reflection here, I think. What sort of roles are a good fit for your knowledge and skills and experience? So in my case, I knew that I wanted to be a chief exec of a small charity. I felt that I had a good level of general, I suppose, charity management skills and experience across things like impact, governance, fundraising strategy, things that were relevant to any small charity. But I was thinking more at this stage about my capabilities and where my interest was. I knew that I'm not the visionary founder of an organization. And at that very sort of early stage, starting with a blank sheet of paper, I work far better where there is a vision and a goal, and sort of mapping out the how we get from where we are now to where we want to be. But at the same time, I also knew that I didn't want something that was firing on all cylinders already, that was really humming along. I felt that I'd quite quickly become bored and need a bit more of a challenge. And what I really learned about myself in my time supporting small charities at the FSI was to help organizations, where my strengths was helping organizations build strong foundations and sustain their work. So the opportunity with PFP was really a perfect fit from my perspective. It was also about then preparing myself. So thinking about what knowledge and skills I needed for this specific opportunity. So as I mentioned, I felt that I had a good broad base of charity management skills. I'd been in a senior management position within a charity, and I'd supported and advised and trained hundreds, if not thousands, of other organizations. But where I was the weakest on was actually the programmatic work that we did. So working in an international context, community-led, place-based, sustainable development, and also a key backbone of PFP's work is in the use of renewable energy and clean technologies in all of our projects. And that wasn't an area that I had a huge amount of knowledge. I've got brilliant people on my board, and that is Nazrin's background. So I had people who could impart that knowledge and wisdom to me, but it was something that I needed to build up myself as well. So I made sure that was a focus of building my knowledge, subscribing to newsletters and LinkedIn groups, and following people who had relevant things to say on the topic to build that up. And I would say it's still very much a work in progress, but important to identify. And equally, if you're thinking about joining a charity that's operating maybe in a different sector to what you've got experience of, if you're thinking about, you've been in service delivery organizations and you're making the move to a campaigning charity, that particular skill set that you need will be different for each of those roles. So it's really thinking about how do you build up your knowledge and skills for your ideal role. My next tip at this stage is to really learn as much as possible about the organization and the people in it. And I've heard in my time through lots of big advice days, small charity week advice sessions, where new chief execs had come into the role and perhaps been blindsided slightly by some of the challenges that they faced. I guess I was in a slightly different scenario from the norm, and that I'd already been a trustee for the organisation for 2 years before I was invited to apply for the role. So I had been able to get under the hood, and I'd been able to build relationships with trustees. But there was a real shift to make from being one of the board to actually that changing dynamic between chief exec and board, and working with them, managing that relationship, building the relationship with the chair in a totally different way to what I had as a board member. That was challenging to navigate, but really positive as well. And learning as much about the organisation, sifting through if it was a new organisation to you, looking at annual reports, one-to-one conversations with trustees, all of that stuff really just helps to lay a really good footing for that first step into the role. And from this, I sort of started to develop some initial ideas for priorities based on what I knew about the organisation. For me, it was around strengthening our board, bringing on new board members because we had some that were coming to the end of their term within the next 12 months. Really looking at our financial management and fundraising, and building our team capacity both in the UK and in our with our in-country partners. And then my fifth sort of focus at this stage and tip would be to start building your support network before you're in post. So today's session's a great chance to connect, and I'd encourage you towards the end, I'll give you the option to share contacts and LinkedIn profiles, but connect with other charity CEOs. I was lucky that at the FSI, I'd had really good direct conversations with the CEO who was there at the time, and she and the trustees had invested in me completing the Aspiring Chief Execs program with Bayes Business School. And what that meant was that I had a brilliant network of people that were making their first step into CEO positions in charities of all sizes. I mean, we had people on there from Muslim Aid, Plan International, a couple of large funders, but a really brilliant network of new and aspiring chief execs to help me prep for interviews and to share challenges and ideas with. The other thing I did was found a experienced senior charity leader. I joined a program called Mentor Mums, which is a non-profit supporting people returning from maternity leave. So I'd recently returned from maternity leave before I started the role, and that mentoring really helped me at that pre-stage as well, and helped me have the confidence to go for it, which I think was incredibly helpful. So those are sort of my tips at the pre-joining stage. It might just be a good opportunity to pause just for comments and reflections. Does anyone, those who are currently CEOs, is there anything that you would add to that mix? Was your experience different? And for those that are still thinking about sort of maybe their first CEO position, have you got any questions at this stage? Frida, go for it. I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you for your introduction. It was absolutely fabulous. And I'm in my second role. I've been a CEO for a small charity, head-to-head sensory theatre. Just lower the hand. As a consultant for kind of 8-10 months, and then kind of now with voluntary action rights in Banstead. The list you gave is fabulous. In my situation, in my experience, for me, it was like the first time was being chucked under a train, and the second under a tsunami. So there's not much chance to do any preparation or anything. You just kind of go into the kind of on the field, and just have to face so much. And as you said, you just do absolutely everything. And possibly the only thing you learn is to get a bit of buffer because again, you're in charge of everything, the helicopter view, the lateral view, the side view, the up, down, the microscopic view. You do from finance to cleaning to admin to whatever, IT. So, yeah, and possibly, so we are an infrastructure. So compared to the other charities, you're even more pulled and stretched because you are depending quite a lot on the local authorities. So there's another layers of relationship that was new for me because I've been involved in charities for many, many years, but not in infrastructure. So yeah, and for example, one thing, as you said, really useful, connecting with other CEOs if you can, because unfortunately, unless you wear the shoes, you can't share with anyone else because no one else can really understand what it means to be in the role. And yeah, and some mentoring. So if anyone's got any suggestion on any mentorship or any organization that organize mentors for CEOs, please pass that on. It'll be really thank you.
I think that's come up in the chat as well, and it's reassuring to know that your experience that the experience resonates. And sometimes it does feel, the honest truth is you feel like you're pulled in a million directions. So that sort of ruthless prioritizing. And when I go on to the next, so the second stage being that kind of encounter stage, I can reflect a little bit more there on some of that prioritization. Yes, Amber's signposted to the Small Charity CEO Facebook group, and there are some links at the end of my presentation, but that's a great safe space to share. I use that a lot and contribute that to that a lot as well. And in terms of finding a mentor, I think, as I say, I went through Mentor Mums and I was clear on that I wanted someone who was at the step in the career that I wanted to take next. So maybe just doing a little bit of LinkedIn research through your networks, or having a conversation with, depending on your current position, either with your chair of trustees, if you're in a chief exec role, whether they can connect you to anyone, or your other board members. And if you're an aspiring chief exec, maybe thinking about someone who is currently a chief exec of an organization working in your subsector that you admire, and you like the work of, might be a starting point. Brill. Okay, let me just double check, see if anything else. Oh, and Madeline's helpfully signposted to another link as well. So excellent, thank you. So thinking then about, okay, the actual starting in post, and that first sort of critical 3 months. I think my first tip at this stage would be really about listening and learning. My first 3 months involved lots and lots of one-to-one meetings with trustees, with funders, with donors, volunteers, listening and hearing from them about what they saw as the key priorities, and certainly in the case of trustees and volunteers, what they needed from me to be effective was really important as well. And I sort of used this really to then further refine what I saw the priorities as being for my first year in post. So testing my assumptions, really clarifying the urgent and the important. If I'm really honest, I tried to do too much in the first 6 months. I probably spread myself a bit thin. I remember I'd recruited using the Kickstart scheme, and I got a bit giddy with the thought of all this extra capacity. But by taking on 4 Kickstarters, I probably didn't have enough time to really support them well in the role. And if I was to do a do-over, I would have taken 2 and really worked them, managed them well and gotten far more value out of them, and manage them more effectively. And I've been able to take that learning into our sort of current volunteer program, which is where we have 2 at any one time, which is much more straightforward for me to manage. I think it was also really critical at this stage to really deepen the relationships that I had. And I referenced the fact that being a trustee, I'd met some of the team delivering the projects on the ground. I had relationships with the trustees, but this was a different relationship dynamic, and it was quite important to really build and strengthen those relationships from the outset. If I reflect, I probably didn't spend enough time building the key relationships with the staff and board members of our partner organisations. And it wasn't really until I was able to do a field visit about 8 months in that I really started to get this going and felt much more confident in the programmatic side of our work. I think also establishing a strong relationship with the chair was really critical. He's absolutely brilliant, and credit to Nazrin. She recruited the chair well. Excellent, really useful sounding board. We have a weekly call. We work on the basis of no surprises, which I think is really, really important. And just so useful to have him as a sounding board, a confidant, a person to help prepare and coach for a particular meeting, all of those things. And that relationship is absolutely critical. If you don't, just a quick, and I haven't signposted to it at the end, but a quick shout out for a program from the Association of Chairs and Akivo, actually, which is called Dynamic Duo. And that's all about the chief exec chair relationship. And you both go along to it and work through the different dimensions of your relationship together. It's a really excellent program. It's also about, I think, that critical first board meeting and other milestones that happen. I think what really helped me was that my chair was clear from the outset that this is much my meeting as their meeting. So thinking in advance what I wanted to get from it, working backwards from those decisions that I needed from them to be able to get on with the day-to-day until the next meeting. And I think this was quite a shift from my previous interactions with the board. So in my prior organisation at the FSI, I was part of the senior management team. I joined board calls and reported to the board, but it was much more about presenting a report, providing any clarifications, answering questions. It was more just a reporting function. And I had to be, in making that step to CEO, I had to be far more strategic and planning for my meetings. And I think it's fair to say I didn't get it right. I still cringe when I think about the first project concept that I presented for approval, I think in my second meeting. And I was light on the detail. I couldn't answer some of the key questions they had for me. And I think the lesson I learned from that was to really put the prep work in and anticipate those questions. And I think this stage is also, it's further building on that support and development and creating space to reflect and learn. The imposter syndrome is real. You've got to find your cheerleading squad. For me, it was my sister and my husband. And we were supported by Sladen Consulting, who provided some pro bono exec coaching for me to make the transition. I would really recommend coaching for a first-time CEO, having someone sort of slightly different relationship to a mentor, someone having sort of that external person, objective person to work through your challenges and doubts and to address areas for development was hugely beneficial. And the other, Sarah, who's on this call as well, sort of mentioned the Lucidity Network. Again, that was really, really positive for me. There were monthly themed webinars, and it was something that I self-funded for my own development, which created that space for reflection and learning. And what emerged for me from this sort of first, I guess, the culmination of the two stages, and certainly what I presented at my first board meeting, was I needed a roadmap, really. I needed a clear plan of what my priorities and focus was going to be. And as I said, if I reflect, I probably did spread myself too thin. But this is what I came up with. And certainly, mileage may vary for you. I needed something I could see on a page, what my focus was against all of the different areas that you cover as a small charity chief exec, whether it's the programs, the partnerships, the funding, the board, staff and volunteers, or comms and branding. but really looking at, well, what's that end goal that we're working towards? You know, for me, it was about a stronger, more impactful organisation with expanded team capacity, and increased income to deliver our ambitions. And this just helped me when the overwhelm took over, just to sort of ensure that I had that focus on the long, you know, the eye, my eye was on the prize, I suppose. And there was a more detailed action sort of delivery plan that sat underneath this. But as I said, I just needed a one pager that I could stick to the wall, and have that constant daily reminder. So I'm just going to pause here before we jump into the third stage, just to see what's coming up in the chat. Yes, someone's mentioned a Kivo membership, accessing mentorship and coaching. Another shout out from Madeline for Association of Chairs Dynamic Duo. Yeah, excellent. I love that approach, Lisa, asking questions, you know, what should we do more of? What should we do less of? What's the motivator for engaging, and where should we be in 5 years? Sammy, I did the Bays course as well. Really great connections. Yeah. And we've got a regular WhatsApp group that we use to stay in touch. And just to confirm, you will have access to the presentation slides. This is recorded as, I think you will. Someone from the small, Wayne or Madeline might correct me there, but really happy to share the slides. And I'm recording it, so I was asked to record it, so I presume that will be circulated or available as well. So moving in then to that final adjustment stage, and I suppose this is sort of the I still feel that I'm very much in this phase. You know, you're past that crucial 100-day mark, but it doesn't stop there. It's really about, once you're sort of more embedded in the role, reflecting on your performance. So my chair requested feedback from all trustees and from our staff and partner staff, and volunteers that had direct lines to me. And he collated all of that and fed back the key themes in a one-to-one over a coffee. And it was really, really motivating and enthusing to hear the positives that people had said, but also being honest about where the areas for development were, and being able to have that honest conversation with one another. I think what helped was that my reflections on where I thought my areas for development were did marry up with what that feedback had been. So there was a lot of consensus there. Celebrate your successes, I think, helps at this stage as well. I really can't emphasize this enough. Nazrin will know, we sort of got through to a second stage for a grant, and I got an email this morning, and you know, immediately I shared that with the team, because it can be such an isolated role, I think, as a small charity chief exec, and sharing that stuff with your board as well. Our work isn't always visible between meetings, so it's really, really important to do this and connect them to the successes. And I think keep in mind as well, although it might feel that you're, you know, particularly if you're new in post, keeping in mind what legacy you want to leave when you move on. It might be some time away, but it's about, again, keeping that focus. And for me, it's that goal in the dark blue on the previous slide. It's really about stronger, more impactful programs, increasing our capacity and capabilities in the country that we work in, and really building a strong, sustainable organisation that will still be here, delivering work and impact long before or long after my time with it. So I'm going to pause there and just hand over again for Q&A. Just to signpost to some sources of support and development. I think they've come up already. So Akivo, definitely recommend their membership. And as someone mentioned in the chat, I think they do have a mentorship program. They also have a CEO and crisis helpline that I've thankfully never had to use, but I know others have used and have found it incredibly helpful. I mentioned the Bays Business School development programs, the Small Charity Chief Exec Facebook group. Do check out if your local CVS offers anything for people in your local area and ways to connect. And I've come across recently ALA forums that I know if you've had funding from Lloyds Bank Foundation, they will fund you to join your local forum, but they're made up of senior leaders in small and medium charities and social enterprises. And finally, don't forget the important role that your chair and board play as well, and those around you. You know, it's not just the sort of external organisations, but your chair and board can be really critical and helpful sources of support. So I'm going to pause there and just open it out for questions. Oh, that's great to know, Lisa. If anyone else is in Warwickshire, a monthly small charity network with lunch. What about some of those of you who are in roles current in chief exec roles currently? What would be your one piece of advice to a new or aspiring chief exec?
I think as you said, it really was brilliant. Thank you so much. You touched on every single point. It's really nice to be working positively with your trustees, because you don't want to have them kind of either judging or feeling separated from running the organisation, bearing in mind that clearly the operational team is in charge of running the organizations. And sometimes small charities, the line tend to blur. So again, if it's a small charity, maybe be clear with your board what are the roles and function, and but clearly work with them in a kind of nice dialogue, a relationship of dialogue, because they're very, very important.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. Yeah. Having clarity on that can be really helpful. And I've seen organizations that have struggled. You know, I think, I mean, a lot of this I referenced earlier, but has been, you know, Nazrin and the board thinking really carefully about the transition from an entirely volunteer-led to an employed CEO role, and being really cognizant of what challenges we might see. And in some ways, you know, it was really critical. I can remember having this conversation quite early on, which was, you know, our board were doing a lot of operational stuff just by nature of the fact that we didn't have employed staff members and things that might traditionally fall within that chief exec role. And actually, I was coming in as, you know, as a part-time. I couldn't do everything all at once. So it was really important that, you know, I held on to some of that operational support that they were giving, or I would have risked, you know, things falling over. So thinking about phasing that transition as well. It doesn't all have to be everything from day one, if that's where your organisation is at. And of course, it's going to be a different experience if you're coming into a well-defined role in an organisation that's employed a chief exec and that sort of thing as well.
So I don't. Is it okay to interrupt?
Yes, please.
I'm also chair of a small charity, and the chair came before the CEO bit. And so, you know, my reflections on being the other side of the table is that we've got a very, very competent CEO who has worked her way up through the organisation and has been there as CEO for about 4 or 5 years. And she and I have had quite a lot of open conversations recently, particularly as my role's changed. It's helped me reflect on how isolating it is for her. And I think what she finds really difficult is that everyone thinks, oh, she's fantastic, she knows everything, therefore we'll just leave her to it. And actually, we're going through an organisational shift with changes in funding and everything else. And so even when they're really competent, actually, I think there's that need to just assume that we all encounter something we don't quite know how to deal with. So I, as chair, push back to her and say, well, what else do you feel you need from us right now? And And I'd like to engage in that same conversation with my now chair, to say, well, you know, periodically I might not yet have communicated what I'm struggling with. So ask me,
Yeah.
and force me to vocalize it, even though it might be uncomfortable. And actually, I think where I'm a chair and she's a CEO, we've grown a lot closer in the last 3 or 4 months, because we're asking slightly different questions of one another and holding each other accountable in a slightly different way.
Yeah, that's so important, I think. And actually, it's really interesting how having those 2 different hats on can help strengthen your practice with the other hat, if that makes sense, because it gives you new insight and learning. But that piece around sort of not making assumptions, and I think, you know, well done to you in that in your relationship with the chief exec, you've created a safe space where you can have those kind of discussions, because that's not always the case in all organizations. And it's really, really important. Yeah.
I did also nick her policy book, so I've got to redo the policies where I'm going. So I said, can I just have a comment of the employee help? So that works.
I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel, believe me. It's always better to start with something and amend it than a blank piece of paper. Yeah. Anna's just added into the chat, her advice is to find ways to connect with the vision of the charity being lived out. Absolutely, like seeing the day-to-day work happening, visit your project work, and that kind of keeping grounded as well as motivated. I think that's hugely valuable. So we've kind of tipped over our 45 minutes. As I say, I'm really happy to stay on, but I know people may have other sessions they're signed up to. I'd just encourage you to drop your LinkedIn profile, or if you're happy to connect and stay in touch with others. I can circulate, if you drop your email address in, I can download the chat and just drop a note to those that popped their email address in, so you can stay in touch, just however you prefer to do it. And you can find me, I'm on LinkedIn as well, so always happy to connect and build a network of other small charity folk as well. Just drop my my link in. Fabulous. Who else is who's signed up for other things this afternoon? Are you tweeting any more sessions, Madeline?
No, not today. I'm doing one every day, I think, except for Friday. Yeah, it's just a very light touch live tweeting, just a few. Rather than, I've done other things where I've tried to get every single word down, but that's not the brief for today. So
no. Brilliant. I shall keep an eye out then.
Nice to see you.
Brill, nice to see you. Thank you everyone for joining. I'll just leave it open for those still dropping their links in, but feel free to drop off and hope to see you. I'll be a participant. I think I've signed up to half a dozen events through the week, so no doubt I'll see some faces pop up throughout. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.